Well, first off, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today for our vaccination town hall for educators and all school staff. I'm excited about the information that we're going to be presenting to you today and also having the opportunity to answer your questions. But before we get started, I'd like to quickly just introduce our panelists today who will be presenting information to you as well as answering some of your questions. First, we've got Dr. Avegno, who you all know from the City of New Orleans Health Department, who's been leading our efforts as our fearless leader against COVID-19. We also have Dr. Benjamin Springate with LSU Health Sciences, who is one of the medical advisors for NOLA Public Schools. We have Dr. Leron Finger, who is with Children's Hospital as their Chief Quality Officer. Hopefully I got that right. And also Dr. Corey Hebert, who we're really excited to have her with us today as well. All right, Dr. Avegno, would you like to kick us off?
I would. Hope everybody can hear me okay. And I'm really honored to be invited, and especially to share the screen such it is with my esteemed colleagues. I really want to thank everybody who's here for being here and taking the time to listen to what we've got to say about vaccines, which is really the topic of the moment. And although it is the topic of the moment, I think I like to start when I do presentations like this to acknowledge the past and acknowledge our very troubled past history with vaccines in this country. There's a long history in America of both government and healthcare providers mistreating large groups of people in the name of science. And we see that today there are still many inequities that plague our healthcare system. Many of these inequities are the things that make our communities of color, our Black and Hispanic members in particular, more susceptible to not only contracting COVID-19, but developing severe illness and dying. And so many members of our community and many people on this call may be skeptical of the healthcare system and skeptical of vaccines in general. And we want to acknowledge that there are very real reasons for this skeptical. But today what we hope to do is to help you see or explain that we believe the COVID-19 vaccine is the way out of this pandemic. I promise you, if there were another way out, we would have tried it by now. But we are close to 400,000 Americans dead because of the virus, and so we really don't have time to waste. So what we're going to do today is share with you everything we know about the COVID vaccines and also what we don't know and be open and honest about it. We don't want to bore you with science, but we're going to try and be as transparent as possible so that you have accurate information that you can use to consider getting the vaccine and that you're going to feel comfortable sharing this information with your community. We're going to answer your questions. We're going to be straightforward when we don't have an answer. And this is just the beginning. We've been having, a lot of us on this call have been having a lot of these conversations, and we're going to keep having these conversations with everyone that is interested until we all can come together as a community and really be as formed as possible. We want to keep you up to date with information. So we're going to lay out a plan for vaccine distribution as we understand it right now. This is a very fluid situation. It is likely going to change, but the plan we hope will help make getting the vaccine as easy as possible for everyone in our community and particularly our school staff, because it really is our way out. It's our best shot to get back to normal life, no pun intended. Tiffany, I think are you advancing the slides? So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Springate, to talk about vaccines in general.
Thank you so much, Dr. Avegno, and thank you for the opportunity to join everyone today. I'm going to provide a brief overview of vaccines and then talk a little bit about the vaccine development and authorization for these particular vaccines for the COVID-19 disease, and then talk a little bit about the type of vaccine before we move on to the next topics in our discussion today. So let's start from the beginning. What are vaccines? Vaccines introduce to your body a part of the germ, bacteria, or virus that causes disease in order to stimulate your immune system to produce antibodies and cells to fight future exposures to the same germ or bacteria or virus. Antibodies are proteins that in your body that fight infections, and together with the cells of your immune system, they can keep you from getting sick or help you recover once you are sick. So unlike medications that help you get better, vaccines can actually help prevent your body from getting sick in the first place and can help your body to be ready to fight off the virus if you're exposed later on. Many of you have received lots of vaccines as a child, and probably many of you get an annual flu vaccine. So vaccines can also be called immunizations or shots. No vaccine is 100% effective. There will always be a few people who still get sick, but vaccines are able to keep the majority of people from catching the disease. All vaccines also have side effects that can affect some people. Many times your arm may be sore or hurt where you received the vaccine, and you may not feel well for a day or two after receiving the vaccine. That doesn't mean that the vaccine gave you the disease. It just means that the vaccine is doing its job, and your immune system is working hard, making antibodies, and getting ready to fight any future exposure to that virus. So the main message here is that vaccines can help prevent you from getting the disease by getting your body to produce antibodies and getting cells ready in your body to fight off the virus if it ever comes into contact again. Next slide, please. So a little bit about vaccine development and authorization. Before we get into the details about the COVID-19 vaccines themselves, I want to explain a little bit about how the vaccines were developed. As many of you have heard on the news, traditional vaccine development can take years to complete. Usually pharmaceutical companies will complete one step at a time before moving to the next step. This time around, all the steps were completed in overlapping phases to speed up development. The same steps were followed as usual, just simultaneously and with the resources of the whole world working on them because of the magnitude of this threat of the COVID-19 pandemic, rather than just one single lab taking one step at a time. So while these vaccines were developed quickly, no steps were skipped in the process. Once the vaccines are proven to be safe and effective in clinical trials, the studies that the pharmaceutical companies conduct, the pharmaceutical companies then send all of their information about the vaccines to the Food and Drug Administration for approval. The Food and Drug Administration is responsible for approving all vaccines, medications, medical devices, and medical tests in the United States. During emergencies, the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, has a process to quicken the approval process and will issue an emergency use authorization stating that the benefits of the product outweigh risks or side effects. They typically have a standard that any new vaccines must be at least 50% effective with few side effects to get that emergency approval. The FDA found that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were more than 90% effective, which is well above their threshold for effectiveness. There are a lot of questions circulating about trusting the information put out by the pharmaceutical companies. The FDA does not rely on the reports or the efficacy rate determined by the company alone. Instead, the FDA actually collects all of the raw information and data separately from the clinical trials to ensure that the trials were performed correctly, that the vaccine is safe and is effective. And this report from the Food and Drug Administration is publicly available online so anyone can read it. Then another group called the Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee meets in an open meeting that anyone can watch online to discuss the emergency use authorization, and they vote on whether or not to approve it. This information is then sent to the FDA administrator for final approval. So for those of you who still don't believe that our federal government can approve vaccines in a non-biased way, you may also take note that both Great Britain and Canada has also approved the Pfizer vaccine using their own separate approval processes, as have some other countries. So the main message here is that the vaccines are safe and effective. The FDA is working to make their process as transparent as possible through open meetings and reports. Now, some of you will have heard of the FDA before, but many of you may not have heard of a different group called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP. The ACIP is a group of non-governmental, non-partisan medical and public health experts that make recommendations for all vaccines. This group's members are nominated by groups such as the American Medical Association and the National Institutes of Health and reflect a wide scope of medicine, public health, and science. In a similar way to the FDA, this group votes on who should get the vaccine and who should be prioritized in public meetings, and then their recommendations go to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention Director for approval. These recommendations are then what states use to determine the distribution model. So this is a totally separate group from the FDA and from the pharmaceutical company that provides recommendations for the vaccines. And so the main message here is that there are many groups reviewing and approving the safety information for these vaccines. Next slide, please. So to go through the slide here, what is an mRNA vaccine? So both of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are what we call mRNA vaccines. Unlike many other vaccines, mRNA vaccines do not contain live or weakened or inactivated virus. mRNA stands for messenger RNA, and we should think of these as instructions on how to make proteins inside of our cells. So inside all of our cells, the DNA or the genetic material helps create RNA, which helps create proteins, and that's how our cells function. RNA is part of every living cell, and it's like an instruction manual telling your cells how to build the proteins it needs to function. So these vaccines contain mRNA, and when injected into the muscle of your arm, it begins to create that protein. The cells begin to create the protein which is found on the COVID-19 virus. That mRNA is then breaks down and is destroyed and does not continue to impact your body, and it does not impact your DNA in any way. Your body's immune system, though, then recognizes the protein and thinks, oh, there's a virus protein. I'm being infected by a virus. So your body starts making antibodies and activating cells to fight the virus. The immune cells ramp up and are able to identify the protein. And by virtue of the exposure to the proteins, after the vaccine, the body then has made antibodies, has activated cells that can fight off the COVID-19 virus. And it has a cellular memory of how to fight the virus faster the next time that you may be exposed. So the main message from this is that these vaccines cannot give you COVID-19, and they are safe, and they do not impact your DNA. Thank you, and I will pass the torch, I believe, to the next speaker, which I believe may be Dr. Hebert.
Yeah, Dr. Hebert is next. So Dr. Hebert is going to explain to us the differences between the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Springate. I used to call Dr. Springate Ben a long time ago, but I have to make sure I call him Dr. Springate now.
I hope you will continue to call me Ben.
No, you're doing a great job, man. Everybody on the panel is doing a great job. I just kind of wanted to just give one extra little piece about this, because historically, a lot of African Americans tend to feel like this vaccine is a little bit of an issue because of the historic distrust that Dr. Begno mentioned. But I just want to throw this out there as a little history lesson. So there was a guy in about 1721. His name was Cotton Mather, and he was a slave owner, and he had a slave named Onesimus. And Onesimus actually was in the middle of this situation in Boston where there was a smallpox outbreak, and it was killing 14,000, 15,000 Bostonians, which was a lot of people back then. And so Onesimus actually mentioned to Cotton Mather, hey, back in Africa and in Turkey and a couple other places that I've heard, if you have smallpox and you take a little stick and rub on the lesion of smallpox and then rub it on somebody else and break the skin, then those people won't actually die of smallpox. And so Cotton Mather, who was the slave owner, was like, yeah, whatever. But then he said, you know what, people were dying, so he did it on his own children, and his own children kind of lived, and then they spread a little bit further with this information, and then a lot of people actually lived from that. Now, Edward Jenner, who was in the early 1800s, started to try to really make this a lot more scientific, and instead of using, because at that point it was called variolization, and at that point they decided they couldn't use smallpox because it was a deadly disease. So they decided to use something called cowpox, and they used cowpox to see if this actually worked. And then they actually did figure out that it worked. And so vacca in Latin is cow. And that's where the word vaca nation even comes from. So when you think back in, African Americans say, well, I'm scared of vaccines. Onesimus the slave actually helped, bring that to light in America. And there's a big statue in Boston calling him the father of American vaccination. So with that being said, I'm going to go into the Pfizer Moderna vaccines because, there are lots of vaccines that are going to be coming out very soon. And as a disclaimer, I am the principal investigator of 2 vaccine trials and a monoclonal antibody trial. So I've kind of been involved in this since the beginning. And I also have received the vaccine, neither one of these vaccines, in a clinical trial about 4 months ago. So the similarities, they're both mRNA vaccines. And without getting into the weeds on this, folks, people ask me all the time, what are the real differences? For what you need to know, you don't need to know that there are any more differences, because, except the whole concept of the fact that one of them has to be really, 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 really cold and one just kind of has to be cold. That's really all you need to know, because the reality of this, when the FDA looks at everything, as Dr. Springate mentioned, they look at all of these things. Some of the other vaccines that are going to be coming out are conjugate vaccines. They're going to be vector vaccines with monkey proteins, all kind of things are going to be happening. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what's actually coming out, and we use these types of things all the time. But right now, both of these are mRNA vaccines, and they're very, very similar. They've given over 10 million doses now since December 14th. It has been a labor of love. I know you've seen people go back and forth, and heard about the ACIP saying that half the ACIP wanted to give everybody 1 dose to see if, and have like 60% uptake, to be able to say that more people are mildly protected, as opposed to just using the folks that are healthcare workers and nursing home residents and nursing home workers, to get them 2 doses to get that done much, get those people protected quicker at 94 to 95%. Went back and forth. Now, President-elect Biden says that he's going to release them all. So we're still trying to figure this thing out. And I will tell you that if you talk to any of these doctors on this panel, one of them is at some point is going to say, I don't know. And at one point, all of them are going to say, I don't know about something. And if you talk to a doctor that says that they know everything, run, because they don't. The differences: Pfizer has 2 shots and it's 21 days apart. And Moderna's vaccine is also 2 shots with 28 days apart. These studies had about 77,000 people in these studies. They followed them for a long time, and we say a long time, 2 months, but in long time in regular vaccine is usually like 5 years. But they were followed. Some of them had things like Bell's palsy. They had 8 people out of 77,000 that had Bell's palsy, but more people out of 77,000 get Bell's palsy from just a viral infection. It has nothing to do with the vaccine. Bell's palsy happens all the time, which is a transient paralysis of one side of the face. Participants had more side effects after the 2nd dose. And the 2nd dose is the one that has given people a little bit of a knockdown a little bit, but it's really not that bad. And what I will tell you, you will see the fatigue, the headaches, the muscle pain, chills, fever, joint pain. Severe reactions were uncommon. People usually just got a epinephrine injection. Some of them had an epinephrine drip in the hospital overnight. It was odd that a lot of them at the beginning were in Alaska, which I don't know why that happened. But I want you to think about it and liken it to, you guys can see my muscles here, right? They're big. I mean, I'm a big, strong man. I'm not, right? I'm very short and thin. But if I happen to have those big muscles, then I would have had to go to the gym. And I would have had to go to the gym a lot. And when I would come home from the gym, man, I'd be sore. But then over time, my muscles would get bigger and bigger, and I'd be stronger. So when your body is actually, when you get this vaccine, think of it as the body going to the gym, and that pain that you feel and that fatigue and all that stuff you feel is your body's way of building up that muscle, which is the immune system. So it's like no pain, no gain when it comes to building up the immune system, okay? So just remember that. And both vaccines showed efficacy of 95%. All right, they went back and forth, and 94.5, 95. I don't know how much of that was business as opposed to the real deal, but I will say that regardless, 94 to 95% is where we are. So we can go to the next slide. The vaccine side effects: 85% people are from Pfizer, and 91% experienced side effects of the vaccine. In both cases, the people that got the 2nd dose got the most side effects. These side effects don't mean you have COVID-19. I'm going to throw this out there too, because there are a lot of people that still think you get the flu from the flu shot, and a lot of this is because of terminology. People think that the flu, when you say the flu, that means you don't feel good for a couple of days. They don't understand that influenza is an actual disease that kills millions and has killed millions of people over time. over the last 100 years, right? So what happens, and you have to really wrap your mind around this, is that we got to quit calling when you don't feel so good for a couple of days the flu, because that's not the flu. So when you get the flu shot and you don't feel good for a couple of days, you say, oh, I got the flu. When in actuality, that's that workout of your immune system to make you feel and get that immunity up so that you won't get the actual disease influenza. So the same thing here. When you finish the first dose or the second dose, you might feel a little you might feel quote unquote flu-like symptoms, but it is not COVID-19 and it is not the flu. Okay, so just remember that. Try not to call the 2-day when you have the sniffles the flu, because it's not. All right. Most side effects resolve within 12 hours, and we've had some side effects from this. And I do want to address 3 things, because I think the transparency when it comes to vaccination, I think it's very, very important. And so they had 2 people in Norway, 2 senior citizens at a home, nursing home, that died a few days after getting the Pfizer vaccine. Now, you say, oh my God, was it because of the vaccine? Nobody can know that, but we know the death rate in nursing homes in Norway is actually more than the 2 people that died at that rate from whatever they died from. And it has no way that we can know that it is because, or even close to because of the Pfizer vaccine, because it was it temporal, meaning they were going to die anyway, or was it causal? And there's no link to that at this point at all. The other person was in Florida, 56-year-old OBGYN, who died of a stroke after receiving the COVID-19 vaccine from Pfizer. But let's just think back about this as well. I don't know if you guys know a lot of OBGYNs, but they're very stressed out. And 56-year-old men have strokes and heart attacks all the time. So once again, temporal, causal, there's no link at this time, but these are the things that you see on Facebook and Twitter that we have to address. So between, if ever we find that there is a causal link between anything that we have talked about and the vaccines, you will best believe you'll hear me say it on the news. You'll hear all 3 of the other doctors rather discussing it all over. So just be sure that you understand that at this point, you are doing something that is a humanitarian effort for you and for others. And if you get a chance to get these vaccines, one of these, please do. And I think those are my 2 slides, and we'll slide it on.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Corey Hebert. So the next slide, we're going to talk about everybody's personal experience, since I think everybody on this panel, except myself, not a doctor, has received this. I'm still waiting my turn patiently. Has received the vaccine. So if everybody, and we're also getting a lot of questions about distribution and timelines. We are absolutely going to cover that. That's going to be the latter half of our slideshow. So we are absolutely going to cover kind of what are the timelines and who's eligible when. But first, we're going to ask everybody just to talk about their own personal experience with receiving either their first, or if you've received both doses of your vaccination, just how you felt. So Dr. Avegno, you want to talk about kind of your experience first to get us started?
Yeah, so we'll get in the next slide who is currently eligible for the vaccine, but I'm an emergency physician by training, and I still work in the emergency department. So those physicians, nurses, housekeeping staff, all of my colleagues in the emergency department and others on the front line were eligible for the open round. So I got mine on the 2nd day they came out, and I've gotten my 2nd one last week. I will say I had a great experience, and in talking to most of my colleagues, they did as well. First shot, I had no side effects, not even a sore arm. The 2nd shot, I definitely had some arm soreness, and I felt a little achy kind of on and off for a day, but I was able to take some Tylenol and ibuprofen, and I did fine. The majority of my colleagues reported the same thing. If they had symptoms, they were a headache, some chills, maybe a low-grade temperature, but they lasted a few hours to a day and did not really stop them from doing anything. So that sort of jives with what we saw and what Dr. Hebert presented. A lot of people did report side effects, but the side effects they reported were mild and the same side effects that you get when you get the flu shot or you get your tetanus shot. So we're not really seeing anything different than that, certainly locally, and for the vast majority of the millions of people nationally. But I'm interested to hear my other colleagues who have gotten vaccine.
Thanks, Dr. Avegno. This is Leron Finger. I too have received both doses of the Pfizer vaccine. I'm a pediatric intensive care provider. For my first vaccine, it was very similar to what Jen said. I had a little bit of mild arm soreness, no worse than actually the flu shot. The second shot, I actually had a little bit more discomfort in my arm, and that evening just felt a little headachy, and then I was fine. So I think overall it was a very good experience, sort of what I think me, Dr. Avegno, and many of our colleagues have expected it to be. We've given this to over 1,000 team members at Children's Hospital and have already begun offering the vaccine to community members who are over the age of 70. And we have not had reports of any serious adverse reactions locally. So I think really a very nice experience overall.
I can speak to mine next. I'm between my doses now, so I've had my first dose, but not yet my second dose. I'll have my second dose this Friday. It caused some soreness over the next 24 to 36 hours in the arm in which I received the injection. I also had maybe a little bit of a chill about 24 hours later, but it was pretty mild. I didn't have to take any medication. I felt otherwise well, and that was that resolved pretty rapidly. My own particular instance, I see that there are a number of questions popping up in the chat pertaining to things like allergies. So I have a history of having an anaphylactic reaction to a different medication. When I was 18 years old, I took an antibiotic. I had an anaphylactic reaction, which is a fancy word for a really severe allergic reaction that causes your throat to feel like it's closing up and causes your heart to beat really quickly, and you get scared, right? And so I had to go to the emergency room and get an epinephrine shot and get IV fluids and get Benadryl and all these things. So I said to myself, okay, well, I've had this history, completely different drug of an anaphylactic severe allergic reaction. You know, should I still get it? Well, everything that we understand about the allergies, you know, suggests that if you've had an allergic reaction to a medication that is not a prior vaccine or injectable, that does not include any of the ingredients that are included in these vaccines, you can go ahead and get this. This is not something that's going to increase your likelihood of having that. As a precaution, I stayed for 30 minutes after my vaccine instead of the usual 15 minutes, just to make sure. But I went home feeling confident, and I think that, you know, we can all take to heart the recommendations around that at this time. You know, if you've had an allergy related to something completely different, that does not necessarily mean that you have to worry about getting this vaccine.
Okay, I guess I will go. As I mentioned earlier, I actually got the Sanofi vaccine in a clinical trial. And so I wasn't sure whether I was going to get the placebo, which is basically saline, salt water, or whether I was going to get the actual vaccine. Once the other vaccines came out, because of compassionate use, they had to unblind it. And so I actually got the vaccine. But I had no side effects at all. I didn't really have any arm pain or any fever, chills, fatigue, anything like that. So that was it. So who knows?
And Tiffany, if you don't mind me going, because I see a lot of questions about allergies coming up in the chat. So maybe I could give sort of a definitive statement that might encompass all of these questions. There are almost no absolute contraindications to getting this vaccine. If you have had an anaphylactic reaction to an immunization in the past, specifically, we want you to mention that when you go to your vaccine provider to get it. And that's the subpopulation that will take some extra precautions. If when you were 8 years old, you think remember that your lips swelled when you ate strawberries, that's not something to be concerned about when getting these types of vaccinations. So we've had these conversations many, many times already. If someone does have extra anxiety about a potential allergy, we at Children's Hospital are absolutely happy to extend the monitoring period past the mandatory and recommended 15 minutes to 30 minutes and 60 minutes, which we've done thus far a couple of times when people had some heightened anxiety about that. But these history of other types of allergies are not contraindications to getting this type of vaccine.
I think we can go on to the next slide. I know some of the questions too, just as Tiffany, you're transitioning, there's a lot of questions about people with certain medical conditions should or should not. Just to echo what Dr. Finger said, these vaccines were studied in all kinds of different people with all kinds of different medical problems. Right now, there is not a single medical problem that is contraindicated to get the vaccine. So if you have diabetes, if you have heart disease, if you have cancer, if you have a variety of other problems, certainly have the conversation with your doctor. Talk about the specific, your specific situation. But right now, the vaccine is approved for everyone, regardless of their medical condition. Let's talk about where we are now. In a perfect world, when a vaccine has been sent to market, we would have sufficient doses for everyone who wants one to get one. In the United States, when you're thinking about a vaccine that has 2 doses, that is close to 650 million doses that we need. We do not have that many doses. So the supply is far more limited through our demand. So because of that, the CDC and other scientific bodies really had to prioritize who should get the vaccine first. And the prioritization is based on a few things, mainly who has been at the greatest risk from COVID-19, and also who needs to keep the healthcare system going during the pandemic. Our hospitals right now are full all over the country, and we have staff shortages everywhere. At the same time, our healthcare workers are at some of the greatest risk because they are exposed to COVID patients over and over and over again. That's why the first priority group was healthcare workers and first responders with direct healthcare exposure, like our paramedics. Also in that first group was long-term care facilities, nursing home residents, and staff, because they have suffered the most from this outbreak. Thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans have died because of a nursing home exposure. So that group was prioritized. That began in mid-December. It is continuing. We still don't have everybody in every nursing home in New Orleans and Louisiana vaccinated, nor do we have every healthcare worker, but we are working through based on what we get. The state and the CDC and then the state adopted the next priority list, and the state moved us into what we're calling Phase 1B, Tier 1, last week. Some states are choosing to stay in Phase 1A until they've vaccinated everyone in that group before moving on. We are not one of those states. And again, all of this decision making is up to the state. So who is now currently eligible? Mainly it's our 70 plus individuals. Again, they have had the highest hospitalization, complication, and death rates. So we need to protect our seniors and our elders. Also some other, our outpatient healthcare workers, dialysis, which is a very high risk group, they are in this one group. The question that everybody wants to know is who's next? And that is 1B Tier 2 includes our K through 12 school and daycare staff. So that is all of you listening on this call. It is a lot of other folks as well. And again, the priority was based on what kind of exposure you have to the risk in the community. Please understand that still our supplies are limited. They are controlled by the federal government. The states do not know more than a few days ahead of time how much allocation they will get for that next week. And you have to plan for not 1 dose, but 2 doses. It is a really challenging logistical puzzle. And so as soon as the states are getting them, they are pushing them out the doors, but they are not getting enough to meet demand. What we are being told now, and I want to caution everyone that this changes regularly, is that we should not expect to have availability for this next group, which would include teachers, until early February. Again, if it can be speeded up, I promise you it will be sped up. But for right now, we are still going through the 70 and up. That is thousands and thousands of people in our community. And so we are working with every available dose to get them vaccinated. And so that's sort of where that falls. What comes after that is a little unclear. The CDC, again, needs to come back and give more recommendations. We expect that it will be people with chronic medical condition, other workers, or we're not quite sure. We don't know where 65-year-olds will fall. I know that yesterday the federal government came out and said, we think that the vaccine should be given to 65-year-olds, as soon as possible. Please understand, our governor has not yet made this decision. And so in Louisiana right now, it is 70 and above. Some of you have asked, when will we get to kids? That's an excellent question. Neither of the two current vaccines currently in use have been approved for children. They are doing trials on kids right now as young as 12 and are going to begin younger kids as well. It is likely that healthy adults and children who do not fall in any of these other categories will not receive vaccine for several months because they do not get sick at nearly the rates that others do. So that's just sort of a little bit of understanding of who's in what priority group. I think that's all from me. Dr. Finger, I think you're up next.
Thanks, Dr. Vegno. And I know we're sort of already at 40 minutes. I'm going to try and incorporate, as I go through my few slides, a lot of the answers to many of the questions that we've seen pop up in the chat. One that I saw frequently was, what about pregnant women? So we encourage you to speak with your obstetrician to discuss this. I can tell you the American College of OB/GYN has recommended that pregnant women be allowed to get the vaccine. We have encouraged it to our team members and certainly to colleagues that are pregnant. I think it is completely safe. If my wife happened to be pregnant now, I would strongly advocate for her receiving this vaccine. So how are we going to do this? Children's Hospital has partnered with NOLA Public School in the city of New Orleans to really lead a coordinated effort to create access for vaccines to all NOLA Public School team members, educator teams, and the entire school support staff. Your school staff will be asked to sign up to receive a vaccine via an online form, and then each school will ideally collect all the needed information to begin the registration process. And then we at Children's Hospital will use that information in order to document an estimate of how many team members within each school want the vaccine. We're going to work directly with school leaderships to schedule these vaccinations once it comes to your available tier, and we have vaccine doses available. Right now, we are able to vaccinate school nurses. In my discussion with the state leadership, I thought that was a reasonable group of people to include in this. And all ambulatory healthcare service providers and other school team members that are age 70 and up will be allowed to sign up for vaccination. And I do believe we've already vaccinated members of that group at Children's Hospital this week. The remainder of the staff, all K through 12 staff, will be scheduled again once doses are available and that tier has been given the green light by the state of Louisiana. Again, we're going to collect all this information and keep it on track. So when we get given the green light, we'll be able to pull the lever and start doing it. I want everyone to keep in mind that there's lots of people, and that means not everyone goes on day one. And I think it's challenging to make sure that we maintain a degree of equity when there's not a large amount of a resource that everyone desires. So no matter where you fall in the program, we'll still have to continue to do everything that we're doing now until we reach a point in time at some time in the future where we can de-escalate some of the mitigation strategies that we're doing. Next slide, Tiffany. So again, the designation of school staff is not just teachers in the classroom, but the entirety of the school support team that keeps kids in school and takes care of and educates children on a daily basis. Teachers, aides, and paras, the entire kitchen staff and maintenance staff, all the transportation team members, administrators and the front office staff, other service providers such as therapists, finally the central office staff. We are going to include all these people in this greater school community in an effort to take care of all of them under one roof. Next slide. Again, there's not going to be a personal charge for vaccines. We might collect health insurance information to cover administration fees, but no individual will ever be billed for the cost of a vaccine. You don't have to have a photo ID, but if you have it, we'll take it to document. You don't need to prove that there's pre-existing conditions. We're only going to track what we need in order to keep track of who has received the vaccine. You'll get a little paper vaccination card showing which vaccine you received. And when you come back for your second dose, we'll be able to fill in the blanks on that piece of paper. Right now, Children's Hospital has the Pfizer vaccine. I anticipate moving forward, we will continue to have the Pfizer vaccine, as the Moderna vaccine is preferentially going to pharmacies and other smaller community hospitals that don't have the capacity for the refrigeration process that we have here at Children's Hospital and LCMC. So again, the vaccine will not be mandatory for team members. It's going to be strongly encouraged, and it's not mandatory at the hospital. Strongly encouraged. Okay. I've also seen some questions about how the prioritization will work within NOLA Public Schools. We're working on that process now. I'm not enthusiastic about trying to create another dozen categories within the NOLA Public School community to triage. As many healthcare organizations have already found, that created a level of complexity that is not necessary at this stage in the pandemic. So we're going to try and keep it simple, but also as we work to roll out this vaccination plan for NOLA Public Schools, our team at Children's Hospital is going to have extended hours, 7 days a week, in order to meet the needs of your entire team.
Dr. Finger, one thing I'd add in, if you are on this call and maybe you are not a teacher or a school staff member at a NOLA Public Schools, but maybe you're at a public school associated in Orleans Parish, we are also working with all of our Type 2 charters that are in Orleans Parish, other public entities, public school entities that are in Orleans Parish. So if you are in Orleans Parish and you're affiliated with the public schools, you will be included in our umbrella. We're working with all public school entities just to make sure that we're all under the same umbrella and everybody has equal access.
Thanks, Tiffany. I think that's all I've got. I'd like to hand it back to the next speaker. I think this is this Dr. Hebert or Dr. Avegno?
I think Dr. Hebert is going to do a quick summary.
Hold on. I'm on mute. I want to make sure I take it off of mute. I just want to once again say that the teachers and the other frontline workers that are not physicians and nurses, you know, sometimes we forget to tell you that we really appreciate what you do. And it is really, really hard to teach children at home. And I just want you guys to understand that we understand that now more than we ever did. So please know that we want to protect you, and we will do everything in our power to get you the vaccines that you need. So first thing we want to do, if you get the vaccine, it's going to relieve the healthcare workers. All right, we are stressed. We still see patients every day, and we see the stories, and we see the things that happen, and we're stressed out too. And just remember, just because you may not have had COVID-19, it doesn't mean you don't have the stress of feeling this impending doom every time you are in the shower and you don't smell your Irish Spring, and then you run to the refrigerator to taste ice cream to see if you can taste it, and you're like, oh, I can't taste it. And, I mean, people have a lot of stress right now, a lot of it. So if you have a mental health issue, then you need to be making sure you take your medicine. But if you don't have a mental health issue, please still know that you have a lot of stress on you. And if you start feeling bad, go make sure that you do something about it, talk to someone. We're trying to protect our high-risk residents. We talked about who they are. And some of these folks have really been run through the ring. And when I tell you, like in some of these nursing homes, it's really bad. One of the monoclonal antibody studies that I'm the principal investigator of, we will be offering that now as a study to children down to 3 years of age. So there's a lot of things out there that are coming, but the high-risk residents are the people that we have to look at first. We want your family. Getting the vaccine is going to keep your family safe. We want you to keep your pods together. We want you to maintain your distance. I was testing some folks the other day, and they were all upset because they had gotten exposed. When I walked into the room to test them, they were all standing very close to each other, talking about how upset they were. Keep your distance. But when you have this vaccine, it'll make sure it'll ensure to the best of your ability that you can keep your family safe and support local businesses. It's tough out there, whatever we can do to support anybody out there trying to keep their families together financially, we should do that and make sure that when you go to these places, tell them thank you, because they had to kind of fight to get this as well. And I mean, I don't know what to say. I miss live music more than anything in the world. I never thought I'd miss the live music that I do. I think we miss being able just to go to the movies and go to the park and be around our friends and family. However, we have to keep our village safe, and we all have to do our part to keep our village safe. So please, if you are able to get this vaccine, either one of them, please get it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We have a lot of questions, and we want to be able to get to as many of them as possible with the remainder of the time that we have. Also, a thing that we will commit to is questions or general areas of questions that we cannot get to tonight, that we will provide a fact sheet where we will try to provide and put those answers together and put that on our website and make that available to everyone, because many of these questions kind of fall into similar categories, and we'll work with the panelists here to kind of get those questions answered, put that in a fact sheet, and put that available on our website with all of our other COVID-19 information. Yes.
Can I ask a quick question? I actually just saw this in the chat, but I just said something that somebody had an issue with, so I just want to clarify really quickly.
Absolutely.
It was basically that we said that it will protect your family, it'll keep your family safe. And what the questioner actually said was, well, do we really know if it keeps your family safe? Because we don't know if it stops the transmission. That is true. We aren't really sure if these two vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, will help with the transmission. What we are trying to say here is that it will keep your family safe if you get the vaccine, and then you may not get sick, and that will also help by you not getting sick. And like I said, we're not sure if it helps with the transmissibility, but we're not sure if it does or if it does not. So the worst case scenario, it doesn't. The best case scenario is that it does.
Thank you. Kimberly Buckingham, can you help us with answering maybe some of the most repeated questions that you saw in the chat that were likely not answered by some of the information presented in our slide deck this evening?
Sure thing. Thanks, Tiffany. Good evening, everyone. All right, so Tiffany, are we going to have a hard stop at 5:30? Do we want to prioritize the last 8 minutes for this, or are we comfortable going a little over?
I'm comfortable with going to about 5:40. I do want to be conscious of another meeting that NOLA Public Schools has at 5:30, so I can go to 5:40.
Okay.
I don't know about our additional panelists, about their additional time. Are you guys comfortable with 5:40?
Sure.
Thumbs up.
Yeah. I have the news at 6, so I'll cut it as close as I can.
Okay.
Great. Thanks everyone for being flexible. I know we've got a lot of excellent questions that have come in, and we just want to make sure we get them answered. So I think by and far the most questions we've gotten is just clarity on who is eligible to receive this vaccine now and who will be eligible in the coming weeks. And I know that we don't have an absolute answer for that, but could we offer some clarification on who now as quickly as we can, and then maybe some other categories that might fall into coming weeks?
If you're over the age of 70 now, you can get the vaccine now. If you're a school nurse or an ambulatory sort of healthcare provider within the school community, your school leadership can get that name to either the NOLA Public Schools leadership, will then get it to us, and we will get that individual scheduled to get the vaccine now. Everyone else is,
and I'll just clarify one thing, Dr. Finger.
yeah.
If you are a school nurse, an ambulatory healthcare provider, speech therapist, OT, PT, behavioral personnel, working with severe and profound students, your school leadership has a survey for you to fill out to provide all the available information we need to provide to children so that you can get registered. So if you are one of those individuals, reach out to your school leadership. They have the form you need to complete to get to fill out so that we can make sure we get you registered with Children's Hospital.
I think the biggest area of ambiguity is who qualifies that ambulatory provider category. So maybe that clear list could be something that's on the tip sheet afterwards, so there can be some clarification around that. Dr. Finger, do you have any other comments before we move on to the next question?
I think that's great.
Okay, great. And if there are any staff members that are working on a visa and are not a U.S. citizen, will there be any issues with them accessing the vaccine? Great. When we move out of this tier into the next one, will staff members that are, say, security staff or anything like that are more ancillary outside of the classroom be part of this tier?
Yes.
Okay. What about incarcerated individuals? Is there any clarification on what will happen there?
So we don't know yet what will happen with incarcerated individuals. We do know that corrections staff will be vaccinated in 1B tier 2. I know there's a lot of advocacy to also vaccinate incarcerated individuals, but we do not have clarity on them right now.
Okay, great, thank you. And the last piece of clarification that we could include in that tip sheet, Tiffany, is how daycares fall into this and what the actual grade levels are. So we'll just note that moving forward. Do we have any insight on when family members of school staff will be accessible as well?
So it will depend on what phase they fall into. So, in my house, I am the only person that is vaccinated because my husband is relatively healthy, is younger than 70 years old, and our children are relatively young and healthy. So I do not expect they will be vaccinated until the general public. And so it just depends if that is true for your family. Yes, if you have elderly family members now who meet the criteria, they can be vaccinated. Otherwise, it'll just depend on where they fall in the approved phases.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, transitioning off of who qualifies for the vaccine at what time into the actual impacts of the vaccine and the side effects. There's a ton of questions coming in around side effects involving infertility or anything like that. Can we talk about what the research shows around side effects like that people are fearful of from a severe perspective?
For sure. Although we're only, remember, just over 300 days ago is when this pandemic came to New Orleans, so we don't have some of that long-term effect. But because of the mechanism of how this virus works that Dr. Springate went over, many researchers are confident that this is actually going to end up, at the end of the day, being one of the safest vaccines known to humankind. It works in a completely different way, and that's where all the information that we have now points. That being said, I can't say that definitively with 100% certainty, but I can tell you this: it is absolutely the best chance we have at ending this pandemic, not just here locally, but across the entire world. We can't, I think, going back to what Dr. Aber says, I don't know, but based on what we do know, it does not appear that this is going to lend itself to any long-term side effects.
Okay, thank you. And as far as short-term side effects for chronic conditions, I know we touched on this briefly, but how will the vaccine after the first or the second dose influence conditions like asthma, diabetes, allergies, hypertension, Kawasaki disease?
So there's no evidence that it made anyone's chronic condition worse. The side effects that were reported overwhelmingly were the side effects that you get with, a variety of shots. It's or localized or immune response. So pain at the injection site. Some people got a rash at the injection site. Generalized body aches, a headache, maybe some stomach upset, just sort of not feeling well. That did not change whether or not you had a medical condition or you were perfectly healthy.
Okay, thank you. And were there any short-term paralysis that comes with this?
So I think you're referring to Bell's palsy, and I know Dr. Hebert touched on this. Bell's palsy is a condition in which you have a temporary, transient, which means doesn't last long, paralysis of some of the facial muscles. We don't know what triggers it. Seems to be triggered by a variety of things. Pregnant women get it at higher rates. People who have other viruses, a cold, the flu, sometimes it happens after a virus, sometimes it just happens. Like the name implies, it is temporary. And as Dr. Hebert mentioned, in the 2 studies, there were a handful of people who got Bell's palsy. However, being an ER doctor, I know this to be true. Every day there are a handful of people who get Bell's palsy who do not have vaccine. And so while they reported it as a side effect, possible side effect, there really was not, it wasn't really happening any more than you would expect in the general population. For example, in at least one of the trials, when 30,000 people are in a trial, they're still living their lives and things happen to them. So at least one person got appendicitis, because appendicitis is very common and people get it. The vaccine did not cause it. It just happened because in the course of life, somebody's going to get appendicitis. So what they're trying to do is be very cautious. The worst case would be that Bell's palsy might be a rare form or a rare side effect of this vaccine. However, if that is the worst case, it is a temporary thing that resolves. And probably the reality is that it's not really associated with it at all. It just happened to happen to a few people during the trial.
Great, thank you for explaining that. As far as when you get the actual vaccine, do you feel how cold it is if it was in a refrigerator?
No, feels room temperature.
Okay, and if you are worried about having an adverse reaction, will there be healthcare professionals around you when you get the vaccine, say if an emergency does take place?
Yes.
Yes, there will.
If there's a long-term impact of COVID-19 symptoms, or I won't say long-term impact, but say you had COVID-19 and some of your symptoms lingered, like loss of smell, does that mean that you're not eligible for the vaccine?
No, and that's a great question, and it's come up a lot. People who have had COVID should still get the vaccine because we don't know how long your natural immunity to the novel coronavirus lasts. They're asking folks to wait 3 months since your diagnosis of COVID to get the vaccine. But again, this vaccine is not giving you any piece of an actual coronavirus. It is giving your body the instructions to look out for it, to know it when it sees it. We're starting to hear some stories, and we don't know, we don't really have scientific evidence, but it may be that people can get infected with coronavirus more than once, which is what makes the vaccine absolutely imperative, because if your natural immunity wanes, this vaccine will provide that additional protection so that you will not get it again.
Do we have any idea how long that protection will last?
We don't. We have to be honest about that because, again, we're just starting to see the vaccine roll out. So we will be studying it, but we hope it will last as long as, say, a measles vaccine, which was pretty much lifelong immunity. It may end up being something like a flu vaccine, in which we have to get it regularly to keep up with the immunity, but we just don't know that yet.
Okay, thank you. And what happens if you have COVID-19 when you get vaccinated and you just don't know it?
So if you don't know it, then that's just bad luck. But if you're symptomatic or you're out on the 10-day isolation period, we recommend that you wait for sure. As Dr. Avegno just alluded to, if in between the first and second dose you get COVID-19, you should not get your second dose while you have COVID-19. You can either wait the 90 days, or if we are blessed in the future with lots of vaccine, you can get it out after you are out of your isolation period.
Okay.
I want to add something to that as well. There was some stuff on Facebook, or one of these actually made the national news at some point, that somebody got COVID-19, and it was a nurse, like 3 days after they got the vaccination. And I just kind of want to give a timeline here. If you get the vaccine, doesn't really start working really well till like 3 weeks after you get the vaccine. So if you are, let's just look at, if you got exposed on December 1st because you had a party at your house, and then you get the vaccine on December 4th, then you get COVID-19 on December 8th, that vaccine could not have protected you, nor would it have given you the illness, because you're not protected at all until you really get to 3 weeks after you've gotten it. So just to look at the time frame when you start thinking about people saying that they got the illness, COVID-19, from the vaccine.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to spend one more moment on medical guidance questions, and then we'll move into some of the logistics of vaccine rollouts. We've got a lot of those questions coming in. So what happens after you get the vaccine? Does any of your behavior change? Do you stop wearing masks? Do you stop taking precautions?
Absolutely not. That's a great question. I have not done anything different now that I'm fully vaccinated. I haven't even hugged my parents. And that's because, and somebody brought this up, and I know, Dr. Aber, you spent some time talking about it. So what the studies have shown us is that of the people who were vaccinated versus the people who got the placebo, right? When a symptomatic case of COVID was diagnosed, so a case of COVID where you didn't feel well or got really sick, 95% of those cases were in people who had not gotten the vaccine, they had gotten the placebo. So what that means is that we believe this is 95% effective at protecting you from getting symptomatic COVID. And symptomatic COVID is the one we worry about most, right? Because that's the one that makes people feel terrible and lands you in the hospital and, you know, possibly die. What we don't know is whether or not you can get COVID and just not know it, just not have any symptoms and still transmit it. So that's why until we reach herd immunity, which is at least 75% of us get vaccinated, when we get to that point, then the virus just doesn't have a place to circulate. There's not enough hosts to pass it on to, and so it dies out. But until we get to then, I don't know that I can't give it to my husband who has not been vaccinated. So to protect my family, to protect my friends, I'm still wearing a mask. I'm still avoiding gatherings. I'm still staying 6 feet apart. I don't know if anybody else wants to clarify that a little bit more, because I know that can be a little challenging.
Thank you, Dr. Ravegno. So getting the vaccine significantly decreases the likelihood of you getting sick, but we still don't have information on spreading this to others. So we need to continue to take precautions, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, moving on to some operational logistics. I know that this information will be forthcoming in the weeks to come. But for now, what information do we have around whether these vaccines will be administered either at a school or at a healthcare facility?
Right now, we are in those planning stages. We are ramping up operations at the Children's Hospital campus with a large-scale effort to be able to do several hundred people a day at that campus. We are exploring whether other options will assist that effort with mobile vaccine teams that can go to discrete locations to vaccinate off campus. We're going to do whatever we can to vaccinate the highest number of people in a 24-hour period. So we're going to work with that combination of items. And if the mobile teams don't look like it's going to add benefit, we'll do it in a central location. But we're in planning with LCMC and the city health department to determine the best way to get vaccines in the highest number of people in the least amount of time.
Great, thank you, Dr. Finger. And Tiffany, does anybody watching right now need to take action to actually schedule themselves for a vaccine, or will additional information be coming on how that should work?
So if you're in that tier 1 group, the action that they need to take is to work with their school leaders to make sure that they can get access to the sign-up form, the NOLA Public Schools vaccination sign-up form, so we can get their critical information to Children's Hospital to get them registered and scheduled for their vaccinations. We also plan over the next week or two to also provide a survey to all school staff that will be in the tier 2 group, so the larger group that includes everyone, so we can start collecting information on the number of individuals that want the vaccine, so we can start getting numbers, so we can start building these processes that Dr. Finger was talking about. That information is going to be critical to us to build a efficient and logistically appropriate response to make sure that we're doing a mass vaccination in an efficient and quick manner. So that information will be coming out in the next couple of weeks, where we ask everyone to fill out those surveys, whether you want a vaccine or you don't. For those who don't want a vaccine, we will be collecting anonymous information only, also about the issues around your hesitancy. So we can also build some communication structures around that and make sure that we're providing information that is helpful to those who maybe are still feeling hesitant. So for right now, and I think there's an action slide that we maybe actually missed, Dr. Avegno. That's here at the end. Yeah, right here. So kind of what we're asking everybody to do is, if you're in that tier 1 group, make sure that you're signing up to take advantage of the resource that's available to you now, so that we are getting you signed up and we're getting you registered. In the next 2 weeks, all school staff will receive a survey from NOLA Public Schools that we're asking you to tell us whether you don't or whether you do want the vaccine. And if you do want the vaccine, we'll be asking you to provide some basic contact information and a few other pieces of information that will help us with building out our logistics process, and also providing some pre-information that will help the registration process once we get started. We don't know the exact date of when we're going to be able to start with the tier 2 that includes all K-12 staff, but we want all the information we can possibly have so we can press go as soon as we are able.
And Tiffany, if somebody misses their opportunity to, or I shouldn't say that, chooses not to get a vaccine right now and they change their mind in a month, will they still have the opportunity to do so?
That will be part of the planning that we will also do with Children's Hospital. We know that maybe not everybody will be ready for the first initial phase. And so how do we build out subsequent phases for those who maybe become more comfortable over time?
Okay, and last question and we'll stop. Will PTO be used for teachers that need to go get vaccines and school staff that need to leave campus to get vaccines?
Can't answer that specific question. That will have to be part of the planning for the logistics process that we create. But I would say what we are building plans towards is one that is low barrier, equitable, and provides the most access to everyone.
Excellent.
Let me give 2 quick answers. The vaccines are not mandatory. They are highly encouraged. If someone has received a monoclonal antibody for COVID-19, they need to wait 90 days until after that antibody was given in order to get a vaccine.
And we have all of the rest of these questions in the chat, everyone. We'll continue to take them down and incorporate that into documents to share furthermore. So thank you.
Yep. And again, just thank you everybody for joining. I know that I don't think I ever introduced myself, but I'm Tiffany Delcor. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for NOLA Public Schools. We're so thankful for you guys sharing some of your time here on I don't even know what day of the week it is. I think it's Wednesday. Just appreciate you guys spending time with us. I hope we were able to answer some of your questions. Thank you to City of New Orleans, Children's Hospital, LSU Health Sciences, all of our panelists. You guys have been such amazing partners to NOLA Public Schools, so many other partners in the city, and to our teachers, and we're really appreciative of all the time you continue to give us. And teachers, educators, we will again be reviewing your comments and your questions and be putting together a fact sheet, especially of the things that maybe we weren't able to answer today. And we'll be putting that on our website along with this recording, which will also be on Children's Hospital's website, which I believe Kimberly shared the link somewhere in that chat. And we'll be making sure that this information is made available to you guys in a regular way. And we just appreciate everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.